This is Paul from Market Square Heroes. Welcome to another Pull Up a Chair. This week, Gordon from the Floyd Effect.
Hello.
Welcome. There are a lot of tributes for Pink Floyd outside. And people keep saying to me, oh no, not another one. Do you think the world's become saturated with Pink Floyd tributes?
If I'm honest?
Yes.
Yes. I think there are too many. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to tell people who are enthusiastic about the music of Pink Floyd, who love the music of Pink Floyd, that they're not allowed to play it.
Right.
I mean, that would be ridiculous. So there's this kind of sort of dichotomy between the two. There are only so many theatres, there are only so many times you want to go out of an evening to watch a Pink Floyd show. So there are too many, almost by definition. The problem is that the music of Pink Floyd is not incredibly difficult to play.
Okay.
If you compare it to the music of something like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Genesis in their sort of more extreme moments, or Yes, that's much more complex music.
Right.
Pink Floyd is much simpler, it's much more heartfelt at times than any of those. But whilst it's not hard to play the notes, it's hard to play them right, to play them well. You know, the intonation, the heart, the soul, that extra little something. And so I think there's a sort of, there are tiers of Pink Floyd bands, Pink Floyd tributes. There are the obvious pub bands. Mm-hmm. They're just cover bands, which is fine. Go along and play Comfortably Numb down your local, and that's great, and everybody will have a great time. Then there's a sort of another tier above that of people who are doing it as a tribute. Then you move up into the small theatres, and then up into the larger theatres, and then you've got one or two who are actually capable of playing stadia or stadiums. And so there are all levels of Pink Floyd tribute. And if there were sort of a couple at the top and two or three in the middle and as many as you like at the bottom in the pubs kind of thing, I think everything would be fine. The problem is that there are simply too many trying to be sort of Pink Floyd tributes in the clubs and the small theatres.
But you must have started somewhere. Did you think, well, hang on, let's put a Pink Floyd tribute together. This is going to be expensive. Why people don't come and see us? All that money we spent, because it's not £500 in the key.
Yeah.
You know, so where do you start? Where do you pitch it and think, originally, this is the level I want it to be?
Yes, you're very right. Where we are today costs us a few £1,000s to put on a show.
Right.
So if we can't bring in 300 people plus, we're losing money just on the costs of putting on. None of the band members take a fee.
Okay.
Nobody takes anything out, and we hope obviously to break even at the end of the year and reinvest. But you're right, we started out, in fact I wasn't in the very original band that wasn't even called the Floyd Effect. But I met our drummer Kerry and another guitarist by answering an advert, and they liked what I did, how I played, so I joined their band as it was. And that really was aiming at clubs, maybe 100 people, something like that, maybe very small theatres. Once I joined, one or two of the previous members decided that they felt that it was it extended a bit beyond them at that point, and they dropped out. And we brought in new people like Gary, who's here today on bass, and Mark on guitar. And then a couple of the other people in the band felt that it had gone a stage further than they were comfortable with, and they dropped out, and we brought in new backing singers, new sax, and so on. And so there was a sort of a leapfrog kind of thing. So it started down here, and it went like so, and became the Floyd Effect at some point, sort of on the second or third tier, and has done this a few times.
Right, okay.
And each year that's passed, we've tried to improve the show. Not just playing better, although I'm certain that we do play the music better now than we did 10 years ago, but adding more professional light fixtures, adding better projections. Well, in fact, in the earliest days, we didn't even have the projections.
Right.
Again, you're thinking about sort of really small theatres, clubs.
Mhm.
You don't think in terms of back wall projections and circular screens and all that kind of thing. But if you want to move into sort of a serious mode of being a Pink Floyd tribute, these are the kind of things that you have to invest in. And if we're honest, they're not cheap.
No, that's what I was going.
So you just build it up and build it up and build it up. And if one or two of the bands out there, and I don't begrudge them this, although I'm a little bit jealous, have had backers. People who've come along and said, I really like what you do, here's a really enormous sum of money, let's go and spend it on lighting rigs and lasers and projectors and whatever, and really turn this into this huge show. Which is fantastic, good luck for them. And as I said, I don't begrudge them it, but I am jealous in a way. Whereas we've had to do it organically, and we started off with a screen so big, and then we got a screen that big, and then another one that big, and so on, and increased its weight-bearing load so we could put lights around it and lasers around it and all this kind of thing. And so we've developed, and I'm sure that next year's show will be a little bit bigger and a little bit slicker and a bit more visually sort of grabbing, whatever the right verb is, than this year's.
I'm intrigued. Everything's got bigger, so it's no longer sitting in the back. Let's get in the back of the van and we can just hook up the trailer and take a few. What do you do now for transportation? Are we talking a great big vehicle now, or
3 of them?
Really?
Yeah, there are three vehicles come to a Floyd Effect gig. There's one for the sound, one for the lights, and one with the band and their own personal instruments. So they're downstairs. There are 3 effectively. I mean, if I said 3 trucks, people would think huge, grey, 40-foot articulated lorries. They're not that big. They're sort of I don't know, not big on vans, but sort of medium-sized, medium-sized trucks. Let's call them that. And there are 3 of them.
But the cost of the shows aren't cheap, as you said.
Yeah.
But you're still selling out on a regular basis. You're doing really, really well. Tonight's show sold out.
Yeah.
Last, so forth.
Last week was in Harlow, and in fact the next one in Colwyn Bay sold out as well. So
And
we're on a streak.
But that's good because if you look at the festival circuit, let's just briefly go into this. Last year there was a headline festival by a Pink Floyd tribute. Yourselves are doing Yarmageddon next year, and we have another Floyd tribute doing Wrexham Rock the Park. Mm-hmm. The music, as older as it's become, and the generation that is also watching it, are still selling out the events, and the music is still headlining festivals. I mean, that's got to be a credit, surely, to the individual bands.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I noticed this. We started doing a festival called Trip Fest about 9 years ago, and if you think of the big bands of the era of the mid-70s, there were really 4 that were absolutely huge at that time, in this kind of so-called progressive rock arena. There was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, played the biggest concert ever in California. Genesis were getting into their Yes were a huge stadium band at that point, and of course Pink Floyd, who were less so to some extent, although they did the Nebworths, and Floyd was still prepared to play some quite small venues in comparison. And when you look at where the music of those 4 bands sits today, Pink Floyd is still relevant.
Yes.
You don't only have the 50-somethings who were there the first time round, they bring their kids, and sometimes the kids bring the grandkids. The music still appeals, it still talks to people. Whereas the music of bands like Yes and Genesis and ELP and others of that time, Jethro Tull and so on, it's still liked, it's still loved in some quarters, but it doesn't have that huge mass market appeal that Pink Floyd has managed to retain down all these decades. So yes, we've headlined 2, 3, 4 festivals over the years playing Pink Floyd. The other things that headline are things like ABBA tributes, Beatles, and so on, for obvious reasons. But of those bands, of those progressive type bands of the 70s, it's Floyd that survived.
Next year, 40 years since The Wall was released. Is that going to feature heavily in the show?
Yes, we've already announced that next year's tour is called The Wall Around the Moon, which kind of tells you pretty much what we're going to be doing, at least in large part. We are going to be doing some other tracks as well, because we think that, well, we did a bit of a poll, sort of a straw poll, not a huge scientifically relevant market research campaign, but we asked around, and a few diehards said yes, play the wall, play the whole of the wall,
Okay.
from beginning to end, and that's it. Just do that, and I would come. But then you mentioned that to a few other people. Oh, the idea is possibly to play the whole of the wall, and they'll turn around and say, that's not for me. A few bits, yeah, or even quite a lot of it, but just the wall is not for me. So what we've done for next year is we're highlighting the wall. We're playing about, I think it's 65 or 66% of it by time off the album. But you've got to remember there's a lot of repeats on the wall, and a lot of little restatements and so forth that, quite honestly, I don't think people are going to notice that they're missing. And so it's going to be featured heavily, but we're still going to be playing tracks from the other albums, including, of course, Dark Side of the Moon.
So we might get one album out of two albums from the wall?
No, we've tried to be a little bit more subtle than that,
Okay.
and put together a set. I think it's 15 tracks from the wall, stretched over in two sections, hence the wall around the moon. And we've tried to make sure that everything flows.
Okay.
Because if you did album one as it was on vinyl, you wouldn't get Comfortably Numb, you wouldn't get Run Like Hell, they're on album two.
Yeah.
But if you did album two, you wouldn't get Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, or Mother.
Yeah.
So, we've tried to pick tracks and some of these little short ones that Roger Waters wrote, or Waters and Gilmour wrote, to link them to tell the story, and try to put together something that works musically really well, but still gives us enough time to play tracks from other albums.
We often go with Floyd tributes, and we're always interested when we get to the Great Gig in the Sky, and the backing vocals that people, it just goes quiet. That is the most. How difficult is it? I mean, it might have been a better question for me back to singers, but how much pressure is there to get that, and rehearsal is there to get that right? Because that is the penultimate song on the album.
Well, it's the last one on side one.
Yes.
For the backing singers, it's obviously a tour de force, and you need exceptional singers to do justice to it.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest, I've heard people do it very badly. We've got an amazing selection of backing singers. It sounds like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but I'm not, because I'm not one of them. I can say that, sitting in front of them and playing the piano parts so that they can sing along. Maybe not every single gig, but maybe, sort of 1 in 2, I'm sitting there and I just go, oh, that just sent shivers down my spine. That was just, that was amazing. And the girls, whichever selection that are singing on the night, they never fail to do justice to it, and I think it can be fantastic. And they always get a standing ovation.
Yeah. Yeah.
They always do, which then gives us a chance to make a few changes, quick guitar settings changes and keyboard changes and so forth, and then we're ready to launch into side 2 of the album.
Just about you, just generally, have you ever wanted to play anything else? You go and play your Pink Floyd on a weekly basis. You ever fancy doing anything else?
Oh, I have done. I've done lots else. Yes, I've been in this industry far too long, I suppose. I think I sang in my first music festival when I was 4 or 5 years old,
Right.
and I played in my first band when I was 16, I guess, and that was itself back in the 70s. So yes, I've played both original music and covers, not tributes as such of other bands, but covers of a huge range of stuff. Other prog rock bands, Motown, straightforward pop, hard rock, you name it.
Yeah.
I've played a wide range, but I guess the real thing there is, perhaps underlying that is a different question, which is, do you ever get bored of playing Pink Floyd, rather than, doing a bit of this and a bit of that and whatever, putting more variation in? And it's one of the things that never ceases to amaze me, is that I guess I've played Dark Side of the Moon now, including rehearsals, well over 1,000 times, from beginning to end, without a break, straight through. And I still enjoy it. In fact, I still get a buzz from it. So there's no kind of temptation to, well, let's throw in a bit of, you know, AC/DC now, or a bit of Leonard Skinner, or a bit of Genesis, or a bit of Camel or Caravan or whatever. It's just like, no, we're playing Dark Side of the Moon. This is just a wonderful, coherent piece of music, and still get a real buzz from it.
One more question then. Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, Mozart, all music written 200 years ago, and their music is still played today. Will the music of Pink Floyd be played in 200 years' time by another generation and enjoy it as much as we do?
Well, the question isn't whether it will be played in 200 years' time, but because we've already got 40 of them, or 50 of them if you include the early stuff. So we're already 25% of the way there.
Okay.
And as you said at the beginning, this is music that is still drawing in sell-out audiences on a night-by-night basis. Will we get to 200 years? Well, if we put aside any questions of sort of, you know, if society is still a society that we would recognise, I think you've got to be certain that some of the music from the middle and end of the 20th century will survive to the 22nd century. And what type of music will that be? Well, it won't be the jazz. The jazz scene was very minor at that point. It's unlikely to be the classical music of that time, the real sort of highbrow classical music, because that had gone down its avant-garde blind alley, and you know, there's classical music of the late 20th century is I think I'm going to get shot for this by the music students out there, anybody who sees this, but I don't think it has the same relevance as a Mozart, a Beethoven, a Tchaikovsky, a Chopin, a Rachmaninoff, or whoever. So what is the dominant music form? What was the new music that broke new ground in that era? And I think there were two at that time. On the orchestral side, I think it was film music.
Right.
If you listen to the music of somebody like John Williams, I could very much imagine that surviving for a long time in the orchestral arena.
Yep.
And when you look at the more popular music, I think you are looking to the likes of the Beatles, Pink Floyd, possibly something like Tubular Bells, which broke completely new ground, and a few others. And we only have to look now, as I said, if we say, okay, let's take 1968 as exactly 50 years ago. What do we remember from 1968? 67, 68, 69, something like that. There's not a great deal. Again, the aficionados like it and love it, but if you say to the current generation, what do you remember of the music of that era? There's not a great deal. But play them some Pink Floyd, and they may not say, 15-year-old might not say, oh yes, that's Pink Floyd, that's from Dark Side of the Moon, or that's from Meddle, or whatever. But the chances are they've heard it and recognise it, and possibly quite like it. So if there is a music that has a chance of surviving over that same sort of timescale, I think you are looking to the Beatles, to Pink Floyd, possibly to, like I say, to Mike Oldfield. Beyond that, I find it hard to say, specifically what it might be.
But there's still the most intense answer I think we've actually had to that question, and I think I've asked it of everybody. It's been an interesting one. This has been Paul from Market Square Heroes with Gordon from the Floyd Effect. We'll see you on the road. Thanks, Gordon.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.